Hey, welcome to the Mission Manhood podcast. My guest today is Jose Alejandro, and Jose really generously tells the story of his whole life from childhood to his early career and through his recent initiation and rites of passage into mature manhood. It's a strong testimony for doing that hard inner work that allows you to establish a firm foundation. And I really appreciate him telling the story. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thank you so much for joining. Hello, and welcome to the Mission Manhood podcast. I'm here today with Jose Alejandro. Hi, Jose.
Yeah. Hi, Angela. How are you?
I'm really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I met you on or through Instagram, which is a great way to meet people nowadays, I think. And I love your content. I love your energy, and you have a beautiful smile. Could you maybe sum up what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that reflection, and I appreciate the compliment on the smile. It just made me smile. Yeah, it's beautiful that we were able to connect via Instagram, especially during this time. I think with the lack of human interaction in real life, it's just beautiful to be able to, run into each other on Instagram and learn about each other. And it seems like we're doing a lot of similar work. Just for myself, I can say I'm a son, I am a brother, I am a grandson. All these different things I think are more dear to my heart. But in terms of titles and the work that I do, I'm a brand strategist, a storyteller, and a men's work facilitator. I'm co-founder of a men's lifestyle and well-being movement called Modern Renaissance Man, as well as co-founder of the Reflex Media, which is an agency focused on amplifying the impact of the men's well-being space. So that's a little bit
Okay.
about what I do.
When you talk about a men's work facilitator, can you kind of break that down for somebody that might not have ever even heard that term or maybe doesn't know what it means?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. Men's work, the term, even for myself, it was something I had to really experience to understand. But I heard one of my mentors explain it once by saying it's when men take responsibility for the way they show up in the world by leaning into brotherhood, resources, events, workshops, whatever the format might look like, but just the resources to really take responsibility for the way we show up in the world.
I love that you're taking responsibility for the way you show up in the world. That's a really great description of that. I think men in general are naturally more outer. They're wanting to go out and
Hmm.
be in the world, and to have that time of reflection where you go inward, and that's where you can take your knowledge and turn it into wisdom and reflect and kind of cultivate your vision. It's the dance between the two, the inner and the outer, that gives you so much power. That's kind of what you've tapped into.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. It's interesting because now when I reflect on all the things that I was focused on that were outer related, they were all with the purpose of, even subconsciously, not knowing that that was the purpose, but they were all with the purpose of finding myself. So a lot of the things that I was doing on the outer was almost an expression of the inner, and the inner being lost and not really having a connection to it, just finding ways to express itself and understand who I was. And the more I got to know myself through the outer experiences and deciding which one of those were my truth and which one weren't, which is still a process and a journey, an edge of practice that I think I'll have for the rest of my life. The more I realized that, the more I learned about myself and realized that the answers were already within. I wasn't really aware of what they were.
When I'm working with especially younger people, they've been very busy doing. Then there's usually some sort of crisis where they think, I've done everything I was told to do to be happy, and I'm still not happy. And that is maybe the beginning of wisdom, or the beginning of when they're open to tapping into that. So, what was your childhood like, or what were your experiences that shaped you?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And before I go into the childhood story, I just want to say that it's something I'm still working on till this day. I had one of my shadow work coaches that I currently work with actually last month suggested that I take a month off from taking in any new information and any new experiences and just sitting still with who I currently am and what I've already embodied and being. So it's interesting that you brought that up because the ego, I've found that even when I've switched from like corporate to this personal development space and helping other men tap into their being from doing to being, I'm still, it's transitioned into almost a disguise where I can always do that inner work and find myself in a hamster wheel of personal development as well. So appreciate you bringing that up.
It is really interesting because the same patterns that you were doing before to get ahead maybe in the world, you start to do that with your spiritual work as well.
Exactly. Yeah, which leads me to my childhood story. I was born in Puerto Rico. My mom was native New Yorker or New Yorican, I would say, and my father was native Puerto Rican. And when I was about 5, they got divorced, which brought me to the States. So I already spoke English really well, but it was almost like this identity crisis at a very young age. Because around
Mhm.
5 years old, I was really starting to establish my friends who I was hanging out with on the weekends, going to birthday parties, etc. And I moved to the States, and it was like my world got pulled from under me, and I had to really just find my place, in a new home.
Did your dad stay behind in Puerto Rico?
He did. He stayed behind for a couple of years, and then they actually got back together. So they got back together when I was about 8 years old. I moved back to Puerto Rico for a bit, maybe about a year or two, and then
Mhm.
returned to the States at around 10 or 11, which is why I had a lot of difficulty really making friends and just knowing who I was in the world. And I think everyone goes through that at that age, but it was just interesting moving back and forth. Throughout my teenage years, most of the summers I would go to Puerto Rico. So I had friends over there that I would go the whole year without seeing and then get excited to see them over there. I have friends
Mhm.
over here. And it was just this interesting dynamic and like duality that I didn't understand at the time. I actually resented. It was like, why can't we just stay in one place? That also combined with my parents, there was a lot of turmoil, anxiety, defeated energy in the household. So going to Puerto Rico was kind of like my escape.
Would you go without your parents? You went by yourself?
I would. My grandparents lived out there. So throughout my teenage
Mhm.
years, it was like I'm going to Puerto Rico, and it created some freedom from their dynamic. Yeah, that their dynamic. I've always been very, very expressive, but throughout my teenage years, I almost my light started to dim, and I would express
Mhm.
myself through style, through creative projects, but I had difficulty voicing my opinion, speaking my truth, owning my truth, and I was doing a lot of things to belong. That kind of shifted my dreams and evolved them into I got to do what society tells me to do in order to be successful. So
Yeah.
into corporate, initially I got my bachelor's in psychology and I wanted to go into consumer psychology, really marketing, but the science behind how advertisements work on the mind. And when I went into corporate, that like creative spark completely faded away. So did a lot of digital marketing, numbers, things related to growth, and just it wasn't really resonating with me. But I stuck with that for about 7 years. And you mentioned a moment earlier that late 20s, early 30s. Okay, I got the six-figure salary. I've got the position I've been working towards for the past 5 to 7 years. I've got the car, I've got all these different things, but I feel confined and I'm not able to do what my heart is calling me towards. Simultaneously, interestingly enough, my parents got divorced again. So when I was about 24, they separated. I'm 29 now. So that brought up a lot of childhood wounds, projections onto my own relationships from when I was 5, the
Mm-hmm.
abandonment, being in between the relationship. And
Yeah, it kind of
yeah,
activated some of the old feelings that you had.
exactly. So yeah, that's, just give the short version. That's when I hit my emotional rock bottom. It was reflected in my relationship with my fiance. My fiance now, at that time, my girlfriend, reflected in my relationships with my friends. It reflected in my job. Got close to losing my job multiple times because I just wasn't present. I wasn't motivated, and I just almost was calling in to be fired and to have a clean slate.
Can you describe that feeling? Was it like a numbness? What was it? Were you like suppressing rage? I mean, what were you feeling at the time where you're almost hoping to be fired?
Definitely numbness, but also I think it led to numbness. But initially, it started as almost like I felt like I was repressing parts of myself, and I wasn't allowing myself to be me. I felt like I was living someone else's life, and there was anger in that. There
Hmm.
was a defeated energy that I often felt from my father. So that was another piece of reflection. I noticed that I was kind of starting to head in a direction that my father kind of showed in the way he lived his life. I needed a change, and a part of me didn't know how to change it. So I was almost sabotaging my life in order to destruct it. Yeah,
If it got destroyed or if you got fired, you would be forced to make some sort of change.
absolutely. Which is interesting because there's a question I always ask many men that I mentor or just reach out to me to ask me how I made that transition. And it's usually, if you got fired tomorrow, how would it feel like? And oftentimes there's this sense of relief, like it would be the best thing that would happen. And then after that, there's these other feelings that come in, the fear of paying bills, the fear of all these fears, but those are usually the ego. The initial
Hmm.
feeling of relief really is the indicator and was the indicator for me that it was not something that I wanted to do and that was in alignment with my truth. So asking that question always brings perspective because usually it's how I felt. It was almost like I was waiting for the world to make the decision for me. I couldn't make on my own.
Yeah. And it's like finally you ask yourself, what would it mean for me to be true to myself?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've mentioned defeatist energy a couple of times. And when I'm working with people in general, but men specifically, I'm always curious about the mother and the
Mm,
father in your relationship. Not even specifically to your mother and father, but almost like how your background shaped your relationship with the great father or the great mother. And that's really influenced by our relationship with our actual father and mother. So,
mhm.
what do you mean by the defeatist energy?
That's a great question and something I definitely dove in pretty deeply and still to this day reflect on how um, the relationship between my parents and the relationship between myself and each of them individually shows up in my life. The defeated energy for me, I've reflected and found has mostly been from my father. I think for most of my father's life, he suppressed all of his emotions. He was the type of man that would never show emotion, would always say he was okay, and then at some point in the month, maybe make a hole in the wall or two. And with my relationship with my mother, it's interesting because there's with the feminine, you said the great mother, so like nature and just life in general, I think can be seen as the feminine. There's this fear of expressing myself. So there was a lot of anxious and impulsive energy from my mom's side, and my relationship with her now is phenomenal. We've done a lot of work on this together, but I always felt like I had to suppress my truth and not share what I had to say because of the reaction I would get from her. And then in life, I see the same thing where I'm afraid that my truth, either people might not be ready for it, or if I share
Mhm.
it, I may lose their favor later on and down the road. And then with my father, going back to defeated energy. The two kind of go hand in hand because I had a conversation with my coach recently about how I often, if I'm not aware, I can come into situations and spaces with a feeling of rejection before the
Mm,
rejection even happens. So
yeah.
there's like this defeated energy before I even challenge myself or show up to the task. It's almost like I show up with that if I'm not aware. And I would say that definitely comes from my relationship with my father.
Wow. I think this is so important and just for people to be aware of. And what you're saying about your mother in terms of the archetypes, when you go on that hero's journey, what you're actually doing is breaking that tie to your mother and you're taking your life.
Hmm.
And in a perfect world, your mother is preparing you for that and telling you how wonderful you are and how you have everything you need and greatly nurturing and caring. And then at some point, the great father comes and basically shows the boy how to be and tells the boy it's going to be horrible, but you got to go kill the dragon and that sort of thing, you know. But so many men are overly attached to their mother. And the greatest you can ever be in that space is a good boy. But once you break that, you're a king with a vision.
Absolutely. That's a great point, which goes into, men's rites of passages. I think for most of my 20s, I've been on this journey of trying to initiate myself. And I think that, to your point, in a perfect world, that's how it would look like. And by that's how it looked like, I mean the way you described it. But in today's day and age, most men are going their whole lives just trying to initiate themselves, whether it's doing really risky things that can endanger their lives but aren't in alignment with what they actually how they actually want to live, or doing things, accomplishing things, getting to the
Hmm.
destinations in order to receive approval. And I recently did my rite of passage 3 months ago with Jetty Azuma from Rising Man. Shout out to Rising Man. And we went out to Death Valley for 10
Hmm.
days and 10 nights, fasted for 4 days and 4 nights. And that went back to that inward journey that we opened up with. That was definitely one of those moments where there was nothing to do but reflect who I am and have become, who I want to move forward as, and how I'm going to serve myself, my community, the world, and those I love. Not every man would be willing to go out to Death Valley and fast for 4 days, 4 nights and slay that dragon. But I would say that men's work and just having men's groups and other men that don't necessarily have that attachment or relationship that you have with your mother or father, having those men to really just help you cross that threshold and ask those questions that can create the introspection where you go from that boy to the king.
There are men that are very easily get into men's work and enjoy it and thrive there.
Mm,
But I feel like every man needs to take the detour, that needs to make the pit stop there
mm,
and do some of that work to cultivate that part that goes through that initiation so that you
mm,
can be healed, so that you
mhm.
can do what is yours to do.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I definitely agree with that. I will say that 4 Day Vision Quest helped me tap into the power I have within the warrior, the king, the magician, the lover, but just allow me to see that, oh, I can handle this thing called life. Like I just came out here, I did this thing that was really scary and I survived. I figured out how to get through it and learned a few lessons, and I can survive life the same way, and I can serve others without needing permission, which goes back to
Yes.
being that boy.
That is so awesome. I'm glad you did that. One thing that I did want to mention is that father wound, and not all men are like this, but it manifests like this sometimes. And it's when a man, and this can be an employer, a father, grandfather, he tries to dim your light in some way.
Mm,
And it's not really even a conscious effort. Like most people aren't consciously doing that.
mhm,
But men even encounter this sometimes with therapists. It's like a dimming of your light. And
mm,
so just to be aware of that, and if that is one of your foundational wounds, like from your father, it's like you're stuck constantly trying to work for that approval.
mhm,
So no matter what you achieve in the world, you're always feeling like that lost boy inside of you never is going to get it. And that's another place to break away and finally claim your life for yourself and realize I am that man. I can be a good father to myself and a good mother to myself. I can care for myself and provide structure and order for myself.
I really appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely something I've reflected on before and resonate with. It's something I've had to do a lot of work on. Especially when I have my own relationship with my father, it's like I can work on it on my own. And then, you come back to him and sometimes there's this pattern. You have to remind yourself the work you've done and be conscious of the practice that you've embarked on.
So often for people when they do return home or go home, you have to constantly remind yourself of who I am, who you've discovered that you are. Because people from your past want you to be who you were
Hmm.
and who they wanted you to be. So,
Yeah, yeah. That's why my power statement. So we created power statements at our rite of passage, and really it's just a purpose statement for the men we want to be. And my power statement starts with first the word grounded, and then unapologetically dot dot dot. So I'm a grounded and unapologetically powerful warrior king who leads
wow.
with truth, integrity, and love. And I found that having that statement and repeating it to myself in moments like that. And I've had statements before my rite of passage, just affirmations, but just one specifically tailored to describe the type of man I want to be
Hmm.
definitely has allowed me to remember the commitment I made to myself on how I want to show up, regardless of who I'm showing up with. And like you said, even unconsciously, a lot of those people that love us, whether family, friends, etc., sometimes they expect us to be the person we were before, and we just
Hmm.
need that reminder, which oftentimes it might trigger something, but it provides and gives them permission to be in their truth.
It's like you're teaching them the new dance. It might be awkward at first, but eventually they're going to catch on. And
Exactly. Yes.
I feel like we're created to create. We're given life to create life. And that brings me to the why. Maybe why you are really giving your life to help others get to where you are. That's kind of what it seems like you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great observation. So I actually distilled my purpose earlier this year with a coach, and I love the exercise. It really brought down my purpose down to one word, and that's truth. So, oftentimes I think men create, even after we do the work, because I had a purpose statement that sounded like an elevator pitch from the past 3 years. And it's mostly focused on a fix, like helping other men do X. And I realized that my purpose is just one word. It's feeling truth, being in my truth, owning my truth, inspiring others to be in their truth. And the reason it's something that's so dear to my heart is that pain to purpose moment. It's something I've had difficulty with for most of my life, but it's something that I've always sought, whether it's through
Hmm.
outward experiences or those inward journeys through rites of passage, men's retreats, plant medicine, etc. It's always been to find more truth. So I know that my edge of practice for my whole life is to find more truth, to express truth, to embody it and do so unapologetically. And through that, I help other men do the same. And obviously, whatever I create are just playgrounds for me to express my truth and bring others to do the same. So, whether it be my agency or Modern Renaissance Man or conversations like this, my purpose, my why is just to bring truth. There's a quote that I'm sure you're familiar with. The truth shall set you free, and it's
Yeah.
actually a quote that I used to have trouble with before, and now is my favorite quote because I used to think of that quote and the word "the" meaning that there was one universal truth, and if
Hmm.
we all agree to it, then we would all be set free. And I I now share this with any men that I connect with. Your truth shall set you free. When we own our own truths, that's when we feel free, and that's when we get to that universal truth that we're all we're all just one. So
That's really cool because that was a very helpful verse for me too. Because what I decided one day is that I'm not free. I kept thinking the truth will set you free. I just needed to gain more knowledge. I needed to
Mm,
acquire more knowledge. But in that realizing that I'm not free and letting go of the knowledge, it really helped me to be able to learn to see. Well, it's
beautiful.
wonderful to get to know you a little better. Can you tell people how they can get in touch with you or where they can follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the pleasure was all mine. I'm truly humbled to have been invited on this podcast and to have an opportunity to answer those amazing questions that you presented. If anybody wants to learn more about me, typically most of my presence is on Instagram, so you can follow me at RJOSE_Alejandro. And in my bio, you can see access to Modern Renaissance Man and the Reflex Media as well.
And I have one last question for you. You signed a recent post, Redtail Bee Water, and I wondered.
Yeah, the great question. So Redtail Bee Water is my Vision Quest name. Ultimately, the Vision Quest that I did had a lot of Lakota Nation ceremony.
Uh-huh.
And when we went out based on the story that we brought back, that we experienced, we were presented with a name that the guides and the elders thought was appropriate. And obviously, we had
Oh.
some insight and take on it as well. So I had a lot of experiences with red tail hawks, and I actually
Mhm.
have experienced a deep connection with hawks. Bee water, obviously, we were fasting for 4 days, so all I had access to was water. And there was this beautiful communication I had with bees where I had set up a small kind of prayer altar just to meditate and kind of do ceremony every day. And I took one of the caps from my water bottles, the gallon water bottles, and I filled it up with water, almost like a offering. And for the
Oh,
4 days that I was there, literally had about 25 to 30 bees in my campsite, just coming and drinking water from the cap that I
wow.
have filled up. So it represented community. It represented
Yeah.
befriending my fears because bees are. I've never gotten stung by a bee. Not that I've been scared, but it was always get away from me kind of energy. Just represented me befriending my fears, welcoming them into my home and nourishing them with presence. So,
Yeah, I really like that. Thank you for sharing.
yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah. So hopefully I'll get to talk to you again sometime and I really appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Likewise, really humbled. Appreciate you having me.